Right. So, um, one of the things that stands out is the alternation between we and me. And that to us seems quite important. So when you start reading the communication, we have your mother, Nancy. She will be held. We will be holding her for a maximum of 7 days. But if you keep reading on, and you get to the last sentence before the footnote, you will not be able to contact me from here on out. And that almost might just blow by you if you're not, paying attention to every little tiny minute detail. But what that suggests to us, and we've seen other cases like this in the past, is that we think that the we is a ruse and that this is one individual. We don't think this is somebody who represents some sort of collective, some group or organization who perpetrated this crime.
Like that was a slip up almost, that me? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So that's one thing. Another thing that struck us, and I will say, Jim and I both independently took a look at these letters before we talked about them together, before we conferred, and we were struck by, many of the same things. So another thing that we noticed was she will be released within 12 hours of deposit to a safe drop-off location back in Tucson. So we see that back there, and at first you might think, oh, so that must mean that she's not in Tucson now, or the writer is not in Tucson, or the abductor. But Jim has some other thoughts on that. I'll let him elaborate on those. But sort of the idea that, well, why did you even put a location in there? Is this sort of a ruse to get somebody to think, oh, they're not in Tucson? Maybe they are in Tucson. So that kind of thing. Then other things that we noticed were and these are very interesting features that I'm going to talk about now because they're highly variable in language. And as I just said, each individual, we have habitual ways of doing these things that are variable. So the date and time format. So you'll see 5, no space, capital P, capital M, 5 p.m. And then later you'll see 5 p.m. again, written the same way. There are lots of ways you can write 5 p.m. You can write 5 space, capital P, capital M, 5 space, lowercase p, period, lowercase m, period. You could put 5 in the afternoon. You don't even have to write p.m. Monday the 9th, 9 th. You might just write Monday, February 9th, Monday, Feb 9, Monday 2/9, Monday 9 Feb in a different order. So you might or might not have the th, but there's all these other variable things you could do with the date and time. And this author does them a particular way. 5 p.m. is 5 with no space, capital, capital, and it's Monday the 9th, th. And so that's an interesting feature that maybe somebody out there could see in the writing of somebody they know.
That is how the Ransom note writer told Savannah Guthrie when her mother would die, but it is not how most people would write it. Most people would write 5:00 p.m. or 5 p.m. This writer wrote 5:00 p.m. with a space, then later 5:00 p.m. with no space. It is a tiny inconsistency, barely visible. Now picture the floor of Nancy Guthrie's bedroom on the morning of February 1st. Picture a white smartwatch lying there at the foot of her bed. That watch was not there by accident. It was placed, and whoever placed it knew exactly where to leave it. The question is not whether they were in that room. The question is whether they left a trail in the words they chose. Before we go deeper into what these notes actually reveal, make sure you're subscribed to Endless Cryme. Because we don't just cover the story, we follow the evidence. 6 months into the...
Hey guys, thanks so much for checking out my show. Really appreciate everybody for watching. I appreciate everybody who has subscribed. In this episode, I'm getting into some really pretty significant new details when it comes to the Nancy Guthrie investigation. First of all, some new reporting about mistakes that were made early on, specifically when it comes to the blood that we saw right there at Nancy's front door. I'll explain that. Also, remember at the end of last week, Sheriff Nanos said that nobody was cleared essentially at this point, which was kind of different than what he said in the past. Well, now he's put out another video statement where he's kind of walking that back, and I'm going to explain what I mean on that. And then, of course, the full notes, the alleged ransom notes, are now out. We haven't actually seen the full notes until now, and I have a retired FBI profiler and also a forensic linguist. And this is so interesting and really kind of blew my mind. They go over both notes and they notice things that I never saw. They're trained to look for specific characteristics. I'm talking about like where commas are, what letters are capitalized, specific verbiage. And there's a reason they believe that both notes were written by the same person, and some other really telling characteristics of the notes that they say could help investigators. So I'm going to get into all of it.
Nancy Guthrie investigation and the full Ransom notes are finally public. 2 emails.
Story that came out over the weekend for the 6-month mark with some new information. And I'm going to kind of just go through some of the headlines with you if you guys didn't see it. A lot of it was stuff that we've talked about over the last 6 months, but some of it was new. According to the Wall Street Journal, 6 months after the February 1st kidnapping, a joint federal local task force is no closer to finding Nancy or her abductors. Frustration over the stalled case set off finger-pointing by Federal Bureau of Investigator Director Kash Patel, who had early on promised to lead the charge, but has since gone largely silent. So this matches up with my reporting that I've been telling you guys about, which is unfortunate, but it is that my sources close to the investigation have also said that they're really no closer to finding Nancy Guthrie. Yes, they're working nonstop. Yes, there's a dedicated task force, but, and I've told you guys this over and over again, and I've checked in recently, they don't have a suspect, and there's not really one direction they're going in at this point. So my reporting matches up with the Wall Street Journal.
Sent to a Tosun TV station. The first, on February 2nd, demanded $4 million in Bitcoin, escalating to $6 million if payment was not received by February 9th. The second, on February 6th, told the Guthrie family that...
I'll just read to you real quick. And we kind of knew, we knew most of this, but to actually see them the way that they arrived to the local TV station is interesting. There was the first one, "Hello, Savannah. We have your mother, Nancy. She is safe but scared. She will be held for ransom, and once payment is received, she will be released unharmed. We will be holding her for a maximum of 7 days. You will need to send Bitcoin in the amount of 4 million USD before 5 p.m. on Thursday the 5th. If payment is not received, the ransom will be increased to 6 million USD, which will need to be paid by 5 p.m. on Monday the 9th. Once payment is received to the Bitcoin address below, she will be released within 12 hours of deposit to a safe drop-off location back in Tucson. If payment is not received by the last deadline on Monday the 9th at 5 p.m., she will be killed. Your mother is aware of this, and her life is in your hands. It is in the best interest of everyone to have this completed as soon as possible. You will not be able to contact me from here on out. There will be no negotiation. Do not play games. Law enforcement will not be able to help you." There's a part that's redacted, and then it says, "She had a white smartwatch on the floor of the foot of her bed, and the white floodlight in the backyard was destroyed." So that was the first note, and I'm going to go through these really carefully in a second with the forensic linguist and also retired FBI profiler, Jim Fitzgerald. But the second note that we now have in full: Guthrie family, we did not fully grasp the seriousness of her physical condition. We never intended to hurt her. That was not our intention. She perished shortly after she was taken. We believe it was heart-related. She is buried in nature now. Nothing you could have done could have changed the outcome. We want your family to know this and hope you all can...
Nancy had perished, that her death was heart-related, and that she was buried in nature now. The notes have been partially leaked before, but seeing them in their entirety changes everything. Because when you look at them side by side, something immediately stands out. The tone shifts dramatically. The first is clinical, cold, specific. The second is apologetic, almost remorseful. But the forensic linguist...
It's interesting you bring that up, because when I was first reading these, and there's weird things that stood out to me, but that's not something I would have written. Not that that means anything, but like if I was going to write a note, I would have said February 5th. Yeah. February 9th. Turn her over by February 9th at 5 p.m. You know what I mean? The fact that it says Monday the 9th at 5 p.m., does that mean anything to you? I mean, is that a certain like nationality that would do that? Or is this a translation? Like, does it mean anything in that way?
I don't know, but it does mean something that you personally would not do it that way. That's kind of the point. It seems, you're right, strikes us as unusual for what's supposed to be a ransom note. You would think it would be precise. You would say 5 p.m., February 9th, 2026, or, something a little bit more rather than, hey, yeah, I'll talk to you on Monday. Like, why do we care what day of the week it is. So it's unusual. I wouldn't say necessarily associated with a particular nationality. What might indicate perhaps a non-U.S. person in this is where you see USD, 4 million USD, 6 million USD, so United States dollars. That seems more likely that a non-US person would indicate the denomination of currency than if it was somebody born and raised living in the US who's more immersed in the context of the US. And that's another point of variability, is how do you write dollar amounts? And we'll see dollar, number 4, word spelled out, million. We don't see 4, comma, 000, comma, 000. Same with 6 million. We don't see the dollar sign with 6 million, but we see the word million. It's not all the zeros. And different people write numbers differently. Also, the fact that all the numbers are written as numbers and they're not spelled out as words. Some people spell them out as words. This author doesn't do that. So
And the dollar sign in front of the 4, plus they wrote million USD. I don't, even putting the dollar sign is kind of interesting. I'm not sure I would have done that.
Right, especially because you said USD, so in a way it's redundant that you're
Mm-hmm.
doing both. But then the next instance, they don't include the dollar sign. So even within an individual, we can have some variability, but we're also seeing
Have analyzed both say something the public has not fully grasped it they were written by the same person. The commas tell the story. In the first note, the writer uses a comma splice, a grammatical error where a comma separates two independent clauses without a conjunction. In the second note, the same error appears. The writer also uses elevated vocabulary, perished, instead of died, destroyed, instead of broken. They write smartwatch as 2 words, floodlight as 2 words, and heart-related as 2 words, all of which are normally combined. This is not accidental. It is a fingerprint. The words don't match.
County sheriff's deputies at first minimized the importance of dried blood found on Nancy's front porch. They failed to seal off the property with police tape to protect sensitive crime scene evidence, allowing reporters, live streamers, and Amazon and pizza delivery drivers entry to the porch. Investigators spent precious hours deciding whether Nancy was kidnapped or lost. A search and rescue plane sat grounded until dusk, awaiting a deputy trained to operate its sophisticated surveillance system. Again, things that we've talked about a lot, that there was time wasted in the beginning, that they wasted time when they thought that she was kidnapped at first. I'm sorry, when they thought that she may have been lost at first. But this part was new to me, at least the specifics of it. County sheriff's deputies at first minimized the importance of dried blood found on Nancy's front porch. The detectives arrived at Nancy's house in the late afternoon. For hours, they gave little regard to the dried blood on the front porch, said people familiar with the investigation to the Wall Street Journal. They suspected the blood might have come from some unrelated head bump, nosebleed, or other incidental injury. So I knew that and I've told you guys that there was time wasted, that they thought perhaps she had wandered off. But in terms of them just discounting the blood, that is not something that I've heard about until this Wall Street Journal report. So that's interesting and just...
Now consider the 3 possibilities. The first hypothesis, the one the FBI profiler Jim Fitzgerald laid out, is that the masked perpetrator abducted Nancy and wrote the notes as a legitimate kidnapping for profit. This is the rarest category of crime in the United States. The second hypothesis is that the abduction was real, but the kidnapping was a smokescreen, a misdirection designed to throw investigators off a different trail. The third hypothesis is the one that keeps investigators up at night, that the masked perpetrator had nothing to do with the notes at all. That someone else, an opportunist, saw the news and inserted themselves into the investigation, trying to extract money or simply to play a game. But the linguists are convinced the same person wrote both notes. And if the same person wrote both, then the question becomes, why write the second note at all? A true kidnapper for profit, if the victim died accidentally, would either go silent or still try to collect the ransom. This person apologized. They expressed remorse. They said, "We never intended to hurt her." That is not the behavior of someone who planned this for weeks. That is the behavior of someone who made a catastrophic mistake. The blood on the front.
Mistakes that he made. It says his appointed head of homicide, Sergeant David Stivers, was reprimanded 2 months before Nancy's kidnapping for poor judgment, blamed for delays securing crime scene evidence in a homicide case, personnel records from a public records request show. Charges in the homicide case were dropped for insufficient evidence. So I've told you guys about how the homicide team was inexperienced, but they're talking about a specific case 2 months before Nancy's where poor judgment was blamed for delays securing the crime scene evidence, and that homicide case was actually dropped. So that's a specific case I hadn't heard about and pretty troubling.
Porch was the first warning. According to the Wall Street Journal's 6-month investigation, sheriff's deputies initially minimized the dried blood at Nancy's front door. They suspected it might have come from an unrelated head bump or nosebleed. They did not seal off the property. Reporters, live streamers, even delivery drivers walked onto that porch. Precious hours were wasted deciding whether Nancy was kidnapped or lost. A search and rescue plane sat grounded until dusk because a deputy trained to operate its surveillance system had to be brought in. The blood was not the only mistake. The sergeant leading the homicide team had been reprimanded 2 months earlier for poor judgment in another case, blamed for delays securing crime scene evidence, leading to charges being dropped.
But then said that nobody was cleared in several interviews, and then on Saturday put out his own video message, which I always think it's kind of interesting when law enforcement or public officials put out these video messages of their own where someone in their office is asking them questions, because it's clearly not a real interview. I mean, it's someone in the sheriff's office asking him the questions. But within that video, I guess you could call it an interview that was put out on Saturday on the sheriff's Instagram page, he spoke specifically about the family again not being suspects. So listen to this.
I can't be more clear. I said this earlier on, and I say it again. The Guthrie family is not and have not been suspects in this investigation. We have talked with them, worked with them. They are not suspects. They are victims of a very horrific crime.
This is the team that walked into 228 Omar Street that found the blood that took too long to understand what they were looking at.
A release over the weekend when it was the 6-month mark, basically telling people, which is something that the FBI profilers I've been interviewing have been saying for a while, but telling people to be on the lookout for anyone who's doing strange things that may have written the notes, normal routine changes, vehicle cleaning or repairs, unexplained interest or disinterest in Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood, noticeable intense interest or disinterest in the investigation, or unexplained knowledge of the situation.
The words don't match, and yet the note writer knew something no one else knew. They described the white smartwatch on the floor at the foot of her bed. They described the broken floodlight in the backyard. These were not details that had been released to the public. They were crime scene facts known only to investigators and whoever was in that room. This is what convinced Fitzgerald that the writer was the abductor. Because how would an opportunist know about a broken floodlight behind the house, visible only from the backyard? How would they know the exact location of a smartwatch that Nancy had worn in a video tour of her bedroom a year earlier? It is possible the crime scene was compromised. It is possible someone flew a drone or saw something on the news. But the simplest explanation is the most terrifying. The person who wrote those words was inside the house. Now the investigators are asking the public for help.
And Brian, you may know better than me, but I don't know if the authorities ever officially acknowledged, yes, the smartwatch was found at the foot of her bed.
No.
Okay.
They haven't. But they have acknowledged that there were things from early on, that there were things in the letter that made them believe that it was real. So they didn't say, oh, there were things, some things, and some were right and some were wrong. And Savannah said the same thing in her interview when she did it with Hoda. So I think those things are right.
And that, and there've been, like you said, there were first responders there and others. There's video of her, of Nancy from a couple years ago wearing the watch. She did a tour of her bedroom on video with Savannah once. Just, fun mom and daughter things, very normal stuff, except she happens to be Savannah, a very successful and wealthy TV personality. So yeah, you're right. 1 and 2 could very well be where this would lean, not both, one or the other, I would say. And we'll see how it plays out.
They want people to look for someone whose behavior changed around February 1st. Someone who suddenly cleaned their vehicle, took an unusual interest in the case, or showed unexplained knowledge of the investigation. They want people to look for someone who writes in a specific way, no spaces after commas, perished, instead of died, destroyed, instead of broken, 5:00 p.m., with no space, smartwatch as 2 words, floodlight as 2 words, hurt-related as 2 words. The sheriff's office released these notes for a reason. They believe someone out there recognizes the writing. The words don't match. Because the second note is where the mask slipped. 4 days after the first demand, the writer shifts from extortion to confession. She perished shortly after she was taken. They wrote, "Mu believe it was heart-related. She is buried in nature now. Nothing you could have done could have changed the outcome." This is not a professional criminal. This is someone who never intended for Nancy to die, who is now trying to manage the fallout, who is apologizing to Savannah while refusing to tell her where the body is. They are not asking for forgiveness. They are asking for understanding. And that is the most revealing detail of all. Because if this was about money, they would have either disappeared or still demanded payment. If this was about revenge, they would have boasted. Instead, they wrote an apology. What do you do with an apology from a kidnapper? You do not accept it. You study it. You run it through every linguistic database, every behavioral profile, every amateur tip that comes in. Because someone wrote those words. Someone knew about the watch and the light. Someone switched from we to me mid-sentence, revealing that there was only one person at the keyboard. Someone used a comma incorrectly and did it twice. That is their signature. That is their fingerprint. Here is what I need you to do. Go to the sheriff's website. Look at the 2 notes in their original form, study them. Look for the date formats, the missing spaces, the unusual phrasing. Compare them to emails you have received, letters you have seen, messages from people you know. If you recognize the writing, if you know someone whose language matches these patterns, contact the FBI immediately. When you read those notes, when you see the broken floodlight and the smartwatch and the misplaced commas, what question would you ask this person's former coworker, their neighbor, their friend? Drop your question in the comments. If you haven't already, hit that like button, share this breakdown with someone who can spot the patterns, and make sure you are subscribed to Endless Crime with notifications turned on. We do not just follow the headlines, we follow the language. And in the end, the language is all we really have. The note writer thought they were anonymous. They thought the words were just words. But the words already gave them away. The words don't match.